Hello again. In this video, what we're going to do is we're going to explore some answers to the hints that were given so that we can design and implement our studio drawing and animation program. So the first hint that was given, which is sort of how this whole program starts, is the question, what initiates the drawing of the character? So I'm going to quickly go back to the drawing board here. When you initiate the program with the green flag, what happens is when you click on the mouse, click with the mouse and drag, what happens is the whole drawing program is initiated. If you release the mouse and move around, nothing is drawn. So it's actually hopefully clear that it's the clicking of the mouse that initializes and starts the drawing. All right, how can you access the location of the mouse as it is moved around? How can you access the location of the mouse as it is moved around? And there's a hint given here, which is the sensing menu. So let's look back at the program itself. If you look at the sensing menu here, I'm just going to focus on here, you're going to realize that one of the options there is mouse X and mouse Y. So the program at every instant knows where the mouse is. So you could actually capture the mouse location from the sensing menu. How can you make a drawing based on the mouse positions? And the hint is given pen menu. So the moment we access the XY locations of the mouse, it is possible for us to go to the pen menu, and let me show you this in real time. If you go to the pen menu, what you can see is there are all kinds of options here about how to color the pen, etc., etc. But you could actually then use the pen to start drawing your program. Okay, so these snippets of code are intended to give you a hint. You could inquire, is the mouse down? You could ask the computer, is the mouse down? If the answer is yes, then we go to the location of the mouse's XY location and we put the pen down. And at that point, the pen starts drawing. Notice that there's a forever block here. This is so because the computer needs to be constantly checking whether the mouse is down or not. So this might be a counterintuitive notion that something is going to be run forever, but the computer needs to be in constant vigilance as to know where the mouse is, as well as whether the mouse is down or not. Okay? How can you store the XY positions of the mouse as the drawing is being created? So let me give you a hint here, and we will discuss this a little bit further. Because we can inquire from the program where the mouse and mouse X and Y locations are, we could store these in two lists, the X list and the Y list. In theory, you could probably join them to a singleton list, but it would make it probably more complicated while you're accessing these parameters later. So I decided to keep these as separate lists. But you could add these values to the X list. And what the add command does, it appends the values to the end of the list. So that way, the list is going to be ever growing as you draw more and more. Here are some questions to basically recap what we discussed. Do we know ahead of time how many locations the user's mouse will visit while drawing? Clearly, the answer is no. The user could at any point decide to draw more, so we don't know. And why is remembering the order of these locations important? It is important because it is the order that defines the shape of this object. If the order was shuffled, you would not get the character you have drawn in the manner that you have drawn it. It will be all jumbled around. What data structure is called for? Clearly a list. All of these conditions define a list to be a perfect candidate for the data structures we're going to be using. How many will be handy? As discussed already, I feel two, one for X and one for Y, keeping track of the X and Y lists. Two of these lists will be, I believe, handy. What ends the drawing? So when the user has created an image, so let's create something else. When I release my mouse, when I let it go, that signals the end of the drawing. If I click it again, it starts another drawing process, but it is the release of the mouse that defines the end of the drawing. What should happen when each of the following keys are pressed? Up, down, right, left. Maybe let's just concentrate on one of these. When the up key is pressed, and let's just show this in here. When the up key is pressed, the entire, I'm going to bring it down so we have some room. The entire drawing is going to be transferred up. So what that means is the Y values we stored in our list have to be appended, changed. You have to add to each of them a particular step size that you must decide ahead of time. You could make them move very little or a lot every time you press the up arrow. I believe in this case I have my step increment as 25 pixels, but you could decide whatever you want. But the important thing is every time you press the up arrow, what happens is the Y values stored in the Y list are going to be added that extra incremental step. Okay. And what ends the drawing? I believe, actually, we just discussed this, yeah. So how should the location information stored in the list be updated to accomplish these movements? It's probably best if when I give you a snippet of code, it's easy to discuss this. And how should the new drawings be created based on these new locations? Let's just look at one of these. This is, by the way, not the only way to achieve this movement when up arrow is pressed. But I just want to give you one example so that you have some place to maybe start and build the rest of your code. I will come in a minute what this warp code block is doing. But when the up arrow is pressed, we want to definitely clear whatever was there. Any drawing that was there before on the canvas has to be cleared. Then I define a variable called I. I is going to be a counter that's going to allow me to go through my list. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to repeat as many times as the length of the X list. So however many items are there in the X list, I'm going to repeat this. So what I do is I replace the ith item on the Y list with whatever was there already plus the step that I have decided. Okay, so you are incrementing the Y value stored by the step that you have decided at the beginning of your program. And then once we have updated the Y list in this fashion, what we do is we go to the ith item on the X list, ith item on the Y list, to go to that particular location, put the pen down. Now this move 0.001 steps is going to be confusing. The creators of Snap decided that when you put the pen down, nothing happens, unlike Scratch if you have used Scratch. So you have to move a tiny amount to make a mark. So that's what that little code is doing. But once we have put the pen down at that location and put a little mark, we pull the pen up. Okay? This is going to be important, especially when you create unconnected parts of your graph. You don't want them to be accidentally joined by a line segment or anything like that. This change I code here is basically, it's incrementing the counter, so you could navigate through your lists and visit them, update them, put the pen down at the appropriate locations, and so forth. Okay, so this should give you a sense of how using the up arrow key, what should happen when you press the up arrow key. Now I want to quickly explain what the warp block is doing. Warp block basically allows you to execute a bunch of code all at once without a screen refresh. That might have been too much. Let me just try to explain. So let me just go back to the image here. So when I draw something and I'm in the moving phase, I use the up, down arrow, etc. So I'm going to move it up. What warp guarantees is that this entire shape that you see here is drawn all at once rather than bit by bit, bit by bit. Because if the screen refreshed every time a new dot has been plotted, this would take forever and it would look really not very nice. So what the warp block does, it guarantees an execution of a block of code all at once before the screen refreshes itself. Okay? If this was too much to understand all at once, what I recommend is remove the warp block and see what it does. And you're going to notice that there is a sequential aspect to drawing all these dots, which is not what you want. You want the entire shape to be drawn all at once. Okay? If this was helpful, great. Otherwise, no big worries. Okay? How should the locations of these new drawings be created based on the new locations? If you examine this code carefully here, you notice that the moment we visit that particular location, putting the pen down and then later up with a little bit movement makes a mark so that your new drawing is going to be created in this fashion. Okay? So I hope this was some help. You should be able to now make a progress with your coding. Best of luck, and I hope you're enjoying it. Take care.